Hello, so I'm gonna make a video, just in case you haven't guessed, but yeah. I'm gonna just talk about human nature a little bit, and I tried to make a video a minute ago, I say a minute ago, about 10, 20 minutes ago, but my brain didn't feel like it was working very good, so I'm just gonna try again. Probably got something to do with the fact that I ate a full packet of Oreos, and, sugar's not great for the brain, but, okay, so I want to talk about human nature, and what it is that distinguishes people from animals. And my friend was actually telling me about a theory of human nature today, and I could sort of I could link it with some other theories on human nature, which are perhaps a little bit older, but I could see what she was getting at. She was saying that what distinguishes humans from other creatures is the fact that we have an ability and a longing to express ourselves, and we do this in many ways. We do it through clothes, we do it through art, we do it through making videos, we do it through watching certain films on the TV, and these are all things that other animals don't do. But I sort of took it a step further, and I was like, yeah, right, this makes sense. You are onto something. This does seem distinct to humans, but what's the driving force behind it? And I was like, well, it's our ability to reason, isn't it? So it's like, well, it goes back to that Aristotelian thought of reason making humans distinct from any other animal. Therefore, what is good for a human is that a human uses its mind, or their mind, in order to be able to reach a state of eudaimonia or human flourishing. Because well, good is essentially relative, and I'm not promoting moral relativism here. I'm saying that good is relative to the species, perhaps. Because well, Aristotle broke the soul up into three parts, no, he broke the he said there was three kinds of souls, and he portrayed this in a triangular hierarchy. And at the bottom, he said there's a vegetative soul, and this includes things like plants and, well, just any sort of plant, something which grows out of the ground. It can't really move anywhere, but it can grow. It's sort of alive, but you know. Um, and then you move up a level, and you got the animal soul or the locomotive, and this is basically any animal. Animals can move around. They can act on instincts. They can eat. They can drink. They can, I don't know, excrete waste. But then you move up a level, and you got the humans who are at the pinnacle. And I believe that Aristotle also talks about God in this hierarchy of souls, but I don't necessarily know. I didn't think he believed in a personal being, but rather an impersonal deity sort of creator, or a prime mover. So I won't go too far down that road. But anyway, he put the human at the top of that hierarchy because the human has something distinct from all other animals, and that is an ability to reason. It's an ability to go backwards and forwards with ourselves on ideas. And okay, does that make us any better than other animals? Perhaps it doesn't, but it does seem to be a distinct characteristic from which distinguishes us from animals. And so going back to what I was saying at the start and what my friend was saying earlier about us longing to express ourselves, that can be reduced down to reason. Is what we use our rational faculties in order to be able to even come up with things like that in the first place. In order to, like, because when we express ourselves, we're trying to portray a message, and in order to be able to want to portray that message, we have to be able to use reason. We have to be able to think about it. So it's like when you put clothes on in the morning, do you just put the clothes on without thinking, or is there some sort of thought process which goes along with it? It's like you might try on one outfit, you might not like it, you might think, no, I'm not feeling this today. So then you try on another one. With an animal, they just go outside, they just walk around, they don't care necessarily what people think of them or what other animals think of them. And yeah, so I just found it really interesting how there's all these different things which you can characterize as being distinctly human, but it does essentially seem to boil down to reason. And another thing we were talking about as well is reductionism. Like, it seems to be in just a prerequisite of the human experience to be reductionist about everything. we can't help but pin things in boxes and put labels onto things. And obviously there's a pragmatic reason for doing this, because if we didn't put things in boxes and if we didn't apply labels to things, then it would be very difficult in order to be able to interact with other people in the world, because the fact that we can categorize things sort of allows us to be able to convey our experience to other individuals, and then they're able to convey theirs back, and then we can just hope that they have similar meanings for the words and for the labels that they use for the external world. And generally that's the case, especially within the same culture or the same subculture where the labels and values are almost in alignment. But obviously there is difference there. But the fact that we're able to identify what a cup is and what a chair is and what, I don't know, a bowl is, it's just practical. It helps us get through the day without necessarily, I don't know, it's like, well, where do you want to draw the line with reduction? It's like you can assume reductionism is a bad thing, which yes, it can be in some cases, because, political reductionism, for example, you can say you're left wing, or you can say you're right wing, or you can say you're centrist, and it's like, well, when people assign those sorts of labels to you, or you assign that sort of label to yourself, then you take the baggage of that with you. You pick up the baggage of all the bad things and the good things which are associated with that particular political identification, and you can't avoid that from happening. So that can be a bad thing. It's like that label. I think Kierkegaard said something along the lines of labels negate, and basically a label reduces something down to something it's not. It takes away from the actual experience of what's happening, but like I was saying, labels do have pragmatic value, because they help us be in the world. But yeah, so perhaps if we look at the political aspect of this a little bit more, instead of asking where someone identifies on the political spectrum, perhaps this is what my friend was saying as well, but obviously it's going to take a little bit more time, but perhaps it's worth taking that little bit more time to talk to someone instead of just jumping to conclusions and just using labels in order to be able to define people. The way my friend put it was that you should ask people questions about what they think about things. For example, ask people what they think about the health service, ask people what they think about privatisation and the public sectors and all of these different aspects in society which are politically related and which can give you a broader understanding of what this individual is actually about, rather than just the group identity of the left wing or the right wing, because there's quite a large chance that you are going to disagree with this person on a lot of things, but you also might see eye to eye on a lot of things as well, and you shouldn't just dismiss their view because they've been associated with an opposing political party to your own. Because me and my friend, we disagree politically on a lot of things and religiously, but we still get along because we're able to have those conversations. It's like she listens. She's a good listener, and that's why I like talking to her, because we can talk about different political issues without things blowing out of proportion or just going downhill. It's like it's fun talking to her. And she's also really into philosophy as well, and so we have a lot of philosophical conversations. It's pretty much all political and philosophical, and then a few other little topics as well thrown in. But yeah, I really like having deep conversations about things, and especially with someone who can actually have a conversation and isn't completely convinced that they're right. Like, they're willing to listen to another person's opinion, even if it may not suit their own. And I think if more people were like that, then the world would be so much more of a better place, rather than just people being closed-minded about things. And, I can understand why people are perhaps closed-minded about things, because it's easy to just be ignorant. It's easy to just hold on to your beliefs, even if you haven't got any great justifications for them. You just don't want to question things. And some people that just don't even seem interested in talking about deep topics and things about the world, but like I like doing that when I'm in certain moods. If I'm in a bad mood and I can't think about things, then you know what, I don't really enjoy doing it as much. But when I'm in a good mood and when my brain's working all right, I do like talking about deep topics. And I guess, well, you know, not everyone's going to want to do that, but um, then if you're not going to ever want to do that, then we're going to have to find another way to see eye to eye. And I do have ways that I can connect with people. It's just that is one dimension of my life that I like to have fulfilled, I guess. And I think my friend also feels the same. She likes talking about these sorts of things. She's interested in intellectual topics, and it's just it's I don't know. We just have some interesting conversations, and also we get to speculate about human nature, and it's really interesting. Yeah, she's an interesting person. If you're watching this, Luca, you're cool. Yeah, so human nature. What the determining factor which seems to make some humans different to others, but obviously there's issues with this, is reason. What if someone's a person but they've lost their mental faculties? They're unable to reason. That person is still a person, and that person still has value, but they're not necessarily. Well, I don't want to say they're not a person, but they're unable to reason. So perhaps there's more to being a person than just being able to reason. Or maybe we should just talk about the general norm of society. Like the majority of humans do have an ability to reason. Just like the majority of humans have 10 fingers and 10 toes and 2 eyes and 1 mouth. It's like that is the norm. So perhaps that's what we should base this off of. Yes, there are outliers. Yes, there are people who don't perhaps fit into those categories, but and those people still have value. They're just outliers almost. And I know that sounds cruel to say that, but it's sort of true statistically speaking. And I am just talking about a statistical outlier. I'm not saying that they should be shunned from society in any way, or that they should be oppressed or hated in any way, because I'm sure that they're great people. But when trying to figure out the nature of a species, we can't just take into account every single detail. I guess we have to just look at the broader picture and what's normal for most humans, and then make our judgment that way. So because some people have multiple personality disorder or schizophrenia. Now, these people still matter, but their brains working differently to the norm, and by the norm it basically means that they're in the is it out of the, I can't remember. I'm trying to think back to maths when we did things like this, but they're not within the average or within the median. The median's the middle. Okay, I don't know. But they're not representative of the whole necessarily. So perhaps they shouldn't be included when thinking about the nature of humanity. Yeah, we'll leave that to the specialists to deal with. So reason is an important thing when looking at human nature. We could also say religious practices, because religion seems to be. Oh, my cat is giving me evils. Will that zoom in? No. Religion. So we seem to be the only species who overtly practices religion, and we have religious scriptures, and we go to church, and what some do anyway, and some, well, I'm talking about the West here, but that seems to be universal, that everywhere there is religious rituals and religious practices, whereby that just seems to be an axiomatic foundation for most societies. And perhaps that's the case. Perhaps religion was developed as an axiom and something which has an evolutionary purpose, and it holds us together almost and prevents social fragmentation. And we can argue that in the West, with the rise of postmodernism and liberalism, that's what's causing a fragmentation within society now. And we can see this in the political domain, whereby there's not really any consensus in society anymore. I'm not saying that there has always been consensus, because I know there hasn't, but yeah, we just don't seem to be able to share those values. And I think religion's an attempt to do that, but I also think it's deeper than that as well, because I think there's truth to the religious stories, and I think it's an archetypal truth that we shouldn't really that we shouldn't really lose, because I guess it tells us something about our being. And I know Jordan Peterson explains this a lot better than me, but it does seem to make sense. Yeah. Okay, so Jordan Peterson, when talking about stories, he says that we explain things with stories before we explain things in a philosophical way almost. It's like we use symbols and mythology as a means of understanding the world before we're actually able to abstract out the idea of what's actually happening within the story. So I think that's quite interesting. And should if we lose the story, are we allowed to keep the value which was nested within the story, or and that's debatable again. We don't know. So should we be so quick to, I guess, lose that? And I'm not going to be able to explain this enough, but yeah, and I need to do a lot more work on it. But I feel like most religious scripture is symbolic, and I think we can criticize both religious fundamentalists and new atheists for taking a literal interpretation of biblical scripture and saying that this is how it's written, this is the way it's intended to be read. Is that the case though? Because that's assuming that the people who wrote the biblical stories were looking at it from a scientific eye. But that's obviously not the case, because the scientific revolution only started around 400 years ago. So how is it possible that a book written 2,000 years ago, and I think even further back for the Old Testament, how is it possible that these books were written with the intention of being read literally? Because that's not how things were back then. It was like that they wrote things in through story and through symbolism. And I think there is a lot of symbolic references in the Bible. And yeah, I don't think we should be so quick to lose them. And I know that people like Dawkins, they say that we should preserve biblical scriptures for the use of just literature, because they are quite interesting to read. But I think what he's against is institutionalized religion, whereby it's been taught as some sort of dogma and forced down on children, and it does seem like child abuse in some circumstances, because you see all these children sat in a hall, and then there's a man at the front who's teaching creationism and telling them that evolution is bullshit, when there's all this inductive evidence which is pointing towards evolution being actually that evolution is an extremely strong argument to make about how we got to the place we are today. And to completely dismiss all of that in the name of religion, it's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. You've got the inductive evidence there, so you can't just reject it and then teach people what is essentially a lie when we have contradictory evidence. It's like, okay, well, for the existence of God, we don't necessarily have direct evidence for or against, and there's a lot of arguments for this, so I won't get into that right now, because I'm 20 minutes in and that's quite a big topic. But I don't think we should be so quick to dismiss the idea of a God, because we don't necessarily even know what God is. It's like Paul Tillich Nietzsche declared the death of God in 19th century, was it? 18th century? I can't remember exactly, but he declared the death of God in this book, Zarathustra. And Paul Tillich read that in the German trenches of World War One, and he got inspired, and he was like, okay, well, I need to revive God. So his attempt was to almost mediate between theism and atheism. How he interpreted it was that the traditional Abrahamic God with omniscience, omnipotence, omnibenevolence, that was the God who died. It was that God. So he's like, well, how am I going to revive God? And he said, well, God is perhaps being itself. And it's like, okay, well, that sort of makes sense. But yeah, I'm happy with that definition, because it's like, it's, I don't know, I don't think we do understand God, and I don't even know if we can necessarily define what God is, but I think there is significance to the idea of God. And then there's Bonhoeffer, who said that, well, God suffers on the cross. God isn't necessarily something like this perfect being outside of the universe. He exists within the universe, and he can suffer alongside us. And yeah, there's all these different like definitions of God, and it's hard to pin it down, because yeah, I just think it's a difficult topic, and we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss the idea of a God just based on perhaps a straw man that is being created by the New Atheist movement of this omnibenevolent being in the sky who's actually extremely evil because he allows so much suffering to go on in the world. And it's like, okay, well, that's a little bit reductionist, and it's like, you don't really know what you're talking about when you're talking about God, and you don't really know what other people are talking about when they talk about God. You don't understand, well, everybody uses language differently, and I think God is such an ambiguous term that it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I understand that religion has been institutionalized in many ways, and this has led to perhaps a false teaching of God, or what I would see as a false teaching of God. There's an idea that we can get to God through the means of art and through the means of language, but it doesn't take us the whole way. Almost, it's like the language and the art, it acts as a signpost pointing towards God. It's like a finger pointing in the distance, but we shouldn't mistake the finger for the thing that we're actually pointing to. But because God is supposedly transcendent, and it seems like almost ineffable, that we can't actually get there. We can just point to it using the means of art. And I was reading about this the other day, and I was thinking, this is stupid, like, it doesn't make any sense, there's obviously no God. And I was feeling pretty nihilistic. But then, so after reading about symbolism, I was like, okay, I wasn't feeling it. So I sat down, and I just got out a piece of paper, and I started drawing, and I was like I get this weird feeling when I get focused, and it comes sometimes, and if I was going to say that I experienced God, I'd say it was something like that. And I think they're right. Like, I think it does depend on how you define God, and I think that by using the word God, you're adopting all of the different. My animals are going crazy. You're adopting all of the baggage that comes along with that, because obviously when you say God, it's like, okay, well, which religion do you support? And so you say Christianity, perhaps, and it's like, okay, well, which denomination are you? You might say Catholic, and it's like, okay, well, now you've got all of this negative connotations attached to Catholicism because of the Catholic Church and the way that priests have been acting towards young boys. And it's like, well, okay, well, that's not necessarily how I experience religion. That's a part of religion. And that's what I was saying at the start with labels. It's like when you associate yourself with a label, it's almost like you carry along that baggage with it. And you can't help that, because people are just they're gonna attach it to you. So it's perhaps best to avoid labels in those sorts of situations. Like, if you're religious, perhaps it's best to keep it to yourself. Keep your faith personal. Act it out in the world. Act out what the New Testament teaches on like helping the poor and just being, I guess, a good person, and just helping those who are a little bit more disadvantaged. Just go out there and do what you can in the world, and just try and be as good as you can. But you don't necessarily have to go out preaching that, and you don't even have to openly label yourself. You can just act, and that's all right. And I guess you can link this to the story of the sheep and the goats about how the sheep were basically the sheep and the goats, they look very similar, and it was hard to distinguish between the two. But the sheep, it's basically comparing the sheep to good people and the goats to bad people. The sheep went out throughout their lives and they helped people, and they offered a hand to the poor. They gave the poor cold cups of water, whereas the goats, they didn't. They just ignored them. They paid their attention to the rich, and come the day of judgment, God basically condemned the goats to eternal suffering, and the sheep, they got saved. They went to heaven, and it's just, I don't know. It's just a message about being a good person, I guess. But it depends on what constitutes a good person. And I guess there is a burden of hermeneutics which comes along with it, whereby your interpretation does matter when it comes to religious scripture, because it's not necessarily so clear about what the message is. I think my cat wants to go outside. I haven't got the front door key. Yeah, so I don't know. I think religion's interesting, and I think the idea of God's interesting, but I think it's also it's controversial and it's confusing, and I don't necessarily know exactly what it is. But like the way that I define God is probably, I don't even know. I can't put a definition on it. It's more of a feeling, if anything. It's more of it's like a state of mind. It's like being one with a moment almost. It's like I know that there's a quote in the booklet that I'm reading at the minute for my philosophy revision, and it says those who have had the most powerful religious experiences are those who have the least to say about God. And I think that makes sense completely, because I've had some pretty powerful I don't want to say religious experiences, but I've had some pretty powerful spiritual experiences, I'll say, and yeah, I can see where they're coming from. I've also had some extremely profound meditation experiences whereby you're completely one with the moment, and you literally feel like you're embodying this transcendent energy or something. And it's like, well, is that what people really mean when they're talking about God? And have people just taken this idea of mysticism and this feeling that we get and tried to put it in a box and categorize it, and it's almost deduced down from, or taken, it's negated what it actually is to experience these things, because we've tried to categorize it. And I think that does make sense. But I do like the idea of art and words as being like a pointer to some sort of transcendent thing. Because I think that makes sense. I don't think you can necessarily define what this is, because it is a feeling, and it is ineffable, essentially. Yeah. I don't think we should be so quick to jump to conclusions about things like this, because we can't even agree upon what the language means. So it's like we're arguing for different things. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm religious. I don't know what I am, and I don't think it matters whether I put a label on it or not. Okay. Thank you for watching.